the current US missile defense posture is overwhelmingly targeted at limited threats, ballistic missiles from North Korea and Iran. Out in Alaska and a little bit in Southern California, there are 44 interceptors, ground-based interceptors that are designed to intercept these upper tier limited ballistic missile attacks, again, from rogue states, right? At the same time, we have an architecture of very capable missile defense abroad in theater, things like Patriot, things like Aegis, things like THAAD that are designed to handle the lower tier, mid tier ballistic missiles, cruise missiles that come at our forces deployed abroad and allied populations. The change that we're seeing is a focus on bigger threats to the US homeland, right? Peer states like China, peer states like Russia are starting to look at using non-nuclear weapons, long-range conventional missiles, like what they're using, for example, in Ukraine, to target U.S. populations. And so it's about securing U.S. airspace, right? This question of, do you build a limited defense for a limited ballistic missile threat, or do you build a comprehensive one for the new generation of hypersonic threats, drones, cruise missiles, things that fly lower than ballistic missiles, that hold targets here at risk?
So it is a reasonable thing for Donald Trump to be thinking about upgrading US defense, whether you like this as a particular policy or not. It is a good idea that he is looking at this.
Well, I think these ideas have bipartisan consensus in the United States and also multinational consensus. Uh, it's not just the United States that's building up its missile defense capability against cruise missiles, drones, hypersonics, these lower flying things, but Japan, South Korea. Europe is looking at the European Sky Shield Initiative. And so I don't think that this is unprecedented for the US to be looking at securing its own airspace a little bit better than it has in the past. You also look at some of the initiatives in the executive order that are being highlighted here. Things like HBTSS, right? Space-based missile tracking. That's just needed to take care of these low-flying hypersonic threats that you can't see with ground-based early warning radar. And those efforts started one administration ago. These have been longstanding programs, and so I think in any administration, it's good for these issues to be getting executive attention.
From your understanding of Donald Trump's plans here, he's looked at the Iron Dome of Israel. He's clearly been very impressed by it. But, you've made it clear that if we're talking about the modern day missiles that fly far lower than ballistic missiles, that the current Israeli system certainly is incapable of stopping those. So from your understanding of what Donald Trump is looking at, is he looking at an upgraded dome, or do you think he's just completely misunderstood what the Iron Dome is capable of, and is planning something that might actually be ineffective?
If you read the text of the order and what's been said, I think you can infer that Iron Dome is used as a metaphor or as a general phrase for comprehensive missile defense, right? Dome is certainly a component of Israel's missile defense system. It's the lowest tier, those rockets, mortar shells, artillery shells. They have two other tiers, right? Arrow, which is co-developed with the United States, and David Sling, which is kind of that middle rung. Um, and so, yeah, I wouldn't take Iron Dome to literally mean the Iron Dome system from Israel, even though the Army and the Marine Corps have certainly experimented with that particular system.
Yeah, I mean the way that the Iron Dome works, we've got this battery of a radar, a control van, a missile launcher. Israel literally spends billions on it, doesn't it? And that covers, what is it, 8,500 odd square miles. Israel, the US, what, 3.7 million square miles. I mean, just physically, I guess initially, but also financially, the same model couldn't be practical, could it?
No, I don't think you could cover the entire US with literal Israeli Iron Dome systems, right? What we're talking about here are space-based sensors that can see much further out, that cover pretty much the entire Indo-Pacific theater that we're interested in. Missiles coming in from directions that we don't even see. And I think a really important component there is the emphasis that's been put on allies here, right? Britain, for example, is a major partner with the US for missile early warning already, right? We have radars that are cooperated with the UK to warn of incoming nuclear attacks, right? Hypersonic weapons, cruise missiles, those kinds of missiles fly under the horizon of those kinds of radars. And so increased investment in airborne sensors that could see those cruise missiles earlier, space-based sensors, which could see those hypersonic weapons earlier. I think that's a worthwhile thing for decision makers to be looking at.
How long do you think it would take to create whatever tech it is, or even to decide what tech is needed right now? And are we? Is it already in existence? Is it just a case of right? We need to spend money on building these things, or is there a whole new program needed to be developed in order to fully protect the US in the way that Donald Trump is suggesting?
I think when you look at the structure of the proposal, right? There's one bucket which is continuity. There's one bucket which is new stuff, and then there's a third bucket which is studies, right? When we're looking at what's being studied, right? There's a proposal to look at space-based interceptors. That's been something raised during the first Trump administration in studies, right? When it was looked at, there were a lot of features that made it unfeasible. Particularly the launch cost of launching all of these, the amount of coverage that you would get, and those systems' inability to deal with those low-end drone and cruise missile threats, which just fly too low for something in space to deal with. That's in the study bucket. When you're looking at systems that are being proposed, I think the most valuable contribution is cruise missile defense. This was something that was pursued heavily in the Biden administration for the past 2 years. The Air Force was put in charge of an effort to lead the limited defense of U.S. cities, key population centers, key military installations against low-flying cruise missiles, right? And when we're seeing, incursions from balloons from these really low-flying threats, I think that represents useful and needed continuity. And when we're looking now at investments that we need to make in existing systems, you look at the purchases of air defense interceptors, missile defense interceptors in the current US inventory. That is not up to speed with the level of threat that we are seeing from Russia and China, right? Congress really needs to look at doing multi-year buys where they set the demand signal for several years in advance so that you can actually spin up the production line to build at scale and push down cost. And so I'm hoping that the next administration and Congress look pretty deeply at what the actual inventories we need are to deal with the next generation of missile threats.
Forgive me if I'm misunderstanding the science here, but the way that you seem to be explaining this to me sounds to me rather like a modern day equivalent of Reagan's infamous Star Wars policy of 1983. Is that exactly what we're talking about here? How different is it? And therefore, are we now just in a world where that is much more possible, much more affordable?
When we're looking at space-based capabilities, right, there's echoes of Star Wars, right, in terms of space-based interceptors. Where there aren't echoes of Star Wars are in space-based sensors, right? That's been an effort that's been pursued for two administrations already, three administrations maybe. Satellites are already in orbit. The government is already well on its way to making essentially a government Starlink for seeing missiles coming in and tracking them. There's some continuity, I would say, there. Space-based interceptors are further off, but that's something that needs further study. And finally, when we're talking about the cruise missile defense piece, the drone defense piece, the part that I'm really interested in looking at, that I think is the most compelling. The interesting divergence from prior attempts to deal with this problem is this emphasis on limited defense, right? You can't defend everything all at once with infinite money, right? You have to pick and choose what priority areas you defend and how much you're going to spend doing it. Prior estimates for developing a national cruise missile defense were in the hundreds of millions of dollars because they made the assumption that you would be using expensive, F-35s round the clock to cover, entire coasts of the United States against cruise missiles. I think everybody is recognizing that's not feasible, but that it's certainly possible to at least defend, major cities, major population centers, major areas of strategic interest against these threats with other systems. And I think the test case for whether this will work or not is how well the Army manages to achieve that in Guam, which is a major a budget item and ongoing program for air and missile defense.
That's quite an interesting point you make there about, you have to make a decision about how much you want to defend. Because, I mean, it seems like a sort of quite obvious one to me that surely all defense systems have weaknesses. I mean, if Russia or China or North Korea, for that matter, wanted to bomb the US, I don't know if I'm right in saying this, but it feels to me like surely they'd be almost able to do that no matter what defense there was, wouldn't they? Or at least have a good go at it. I guess my point, Masao, is wouldn't it be better to deter by having sort of greater attacking might than sort of hope to defend whatever comes your way?
Well, that's the interesting thing, right? The capabilities that you need to develop to do defense, the technologies that go into them, have become the backbone of our modern strike complex. The sensors that you need to do defense, right? That those networks, what we call a kill chain, to get the sensor data to a shooter and then target the incoming missile, that became the backbone. That became the technological underpinnings of offensive strike, right? Determining, what to hit, finding those mobile missile launchers and striking them, right? So I actually think that offense and defense are inextricably linked in that way. But the second thing I'd say is, uh, yeah, I think that deterring attacks with offense is really important. But defense increases the decision space for leaders and allows for off ramps where there otherwise wouldn't be, right? When Iran was trying to attack Israel with those ballistic missiles, suppose some of those did hit population centers. I think there would have been a lot more incentives for Israeli decision makers to escalate the conflict and for things to get out of control. The fact that you can prevent something from happening, you can't prevent everything from happening. But if in edge cases, if you can prevent something from happening, you can create diplomatic off ramps for conflict. And setting all of that aside, right? Military campaign planning is a difficult art, right? You need certainty that you're going to take out this runway within 6 hours in order to proceed with the next steps of your plan of attack. If you create uncertainty in Russia's mind, China's mind, any adversary's mind, that that's achievable in the early stages of a conflict, if there's 20% uncertainty on that, you create uncertainty on everything else, that's scheduled, right? Everything else that's planned in the campaign. So I think these things are complementary. I don't think that you can have one and not have the other.
If they are complementary in the way you say, do you think Donald Trump's peace through strength message and the fact that he is looking so seriously at this Iron Dome is neglecting the attack necessities as well? Then is he not thinking enough about a balance?
If you read the executive order, there's a point that makes clear that they want to look at offense defense integration, right? And so-called left of launch capabilities. That is capabilities to strike, adversary missiles before they're launched to begin with. So I think for a long time, the missile defense enterprise has recognized there's an interplay between offense and defense. I think there's remarkable continuity in the document, certainly about the topic.